Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Navtej Sarna, who is the former Indian ambassador to the United States, also to the United Kingdom. Ambassador Sarna, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. And I just want to pick up on what we were talking about there with Shashi Tharoor before we spoke to you. We were talking about the summit of Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is being held in the Chinese city of Tianjin. And one analyst is quoted as saying that President Trump is rattled by India, China and Russia coming together, and he wants to try and split up this emerging partnership. Do you think that's true?
Well, I can't speak for President Trump, but it's quite possible that the symbolism of the summit and the three leaders meeting together in an obvious situation of some comfort, I think would have disturbed President Trump. I'm not sure that that was the intention of all of them, but it could be a part of the subtext.
Indeed, and I mean, we've seen the pictures, and we were talking about it just a moment ago, pictures of even Prime Minister Modi and President Putin holding hands. They're talking about a special relationship. I mean, do you think India is trying to send a message here to Washington?
Well, two things here. I think one, the India-Russia relationship is not something that is new. I think it goes back much into our history for the last 60 years or so, at least for the last, since 1971, it's been a consistent support for India. And we have, held that relationship as, and we call it time-tested. At the same time, we have been building up the India-US relationship for the last 25 years, and we have managed to successfully carry on both relationships, not always consistently. I mean, there have been ups and downs, but I think it has been in the strategic interest of both Russia and US, as well as India, to keep all these equations going at the same time. Now, what has happened is because of Mr. Trump's actions and statements by not only by the president, but people around him, that the trust factor in the India-US relationship has been severely damaged. And obviously, it's not that we are now suddenly reaching out to Russia, but yes, there is an element of signaling here. There is an element of diplomatic theater here, that India has options. India has other relationships. We are not giving up on the US relationship, but we are also reviving and strengthening the others.
Okay, but if I were to put on my American hat, and I'm not American, but the Americans are angered. They say the underlying cause of all of this tension and the reason Mr. Trump did what he did and imposed those tariffs is simple. Russia has been selling oil to China and India using these so-called dark fleets to transport it. And that money is funding Russia's war effort in Ukraine. So don't you think Washington is justified in being irritated, to say the very least?
I think that's a highly inconsistent view. If that was truly Washington's view, they would have imposed higher tariffs on China, which imports much more Russian oil than India did. And by the way, Indian imports of Russian oil have been declining, not because of Mr. Trump's statements, but because the discounts have been going down. As well, I mean, Mr. Trump has not held that view as far as Europe is concerned, which continues to import gas from Russia. So I think that is a sort of facile view that, India is funding Ukraine's war. I mean, you can't lay the blame of not being able to end the Russia-Ukraine war at India's doorstep.
Clearly, you're watching all of this on playing out and on your television screen and probably remembering with affection your time in Washington. At the same time, you're probably thinking how you might advise President Donald Trump to deal with New Delhi, knowing as you do both cultures extremely well. What would your advice be to him?
I would say that he should go back to Trump 1.0. We made a lot of progress in Trump's first term because India was still being seen through a strategic lens. India was being seen as a crucial linchpin of the Indo-Pacific policy, as a huge market, as a supplier of technically qualified people, helping a lot of the tech industry in the United States. India is a democracy. India is a pluralistic country and has a lot of fundamental convergences with the United States. It is very odd that all the progress, all the strategic progress that was made in Trump's first term, possibly under the guidance of some of his advisors at that time, has been thrown to the winds in one summer. And it's not just that. This has been a steadily growing relationship, whether the person in the White House was a Democrat or a Republican, ever since President Bill Clinton. I would suggest, hardly in my place to advise a president, but I would suggest to the Trump whisperers that please go back to the drawing board and see that you are actually committing suicide by doing this to the India-US relationship.
And obviously one of the techniques that President Trump uses is, obviously he's keen on social media, meaning that quite a lot of diplomatic discussion is carried out in a rather public way, i.e. it gets posted on Truth Social or one of the other platforms. How do you think that goes down in New Delhi?
Well, I think, at one time, this was a sort of attractive disruption to rather old-fashioned diplomacy. Today, it shows that there is no policy in Washington. Today, it shows that there is no analysis in Washington. So if you're announcing foreign policy, major foreign policy initiatives and decisions via tweet, then obviously it hasn't gone through the grill that these serious relationships deserve. So today it is, I'm afraid, it's become a mockery of foreign policy relationships. And I think it's not going to help anybody, but most important, it's not going to help the United States.
Okay, any pointers perhaps for your Prime Minister? I don't know if you're in touch with Prime Minister Modi on these issues. Perhaps you're not allowed to say. But would you say there are any techniques that you've noticed that might go down well in terms of bringing about a constructive dialogue with this new administration in Washington?
Well, I think a lot of countries have tried flattery of President Trump. A lot of countries have tried sort of cajoling him by investments and even offers of aeroplanes and all that. I think the time for all that is over. Certainly, it is not in India's DNA to come to the relationship like that. Yes, we can do things to project India's investments. We can do things to meet genuine American concerns. But India will continue, and I don't need to advise anybody. I think I can see it's already happening. India will continue to approach this relationship with patience, with restraint, and with dignity. And we will hope that in the end, a lot of the work that has been done for a quarter of a century will not go waste, because there are fundamental strategic logics and reasons behind that work. And I think once this phase is over, I believe that all phases go over. I think we have to bide our time. And we have to go back to building that relationship which has been built block by block in mutual interest of both countries. It's a very valuable relationship, not just for us, not just for the United States, but I think for global politics.
Indeed, and when we were talking to Dr. Shashi Tharoor before we crossed to you, he used a cricketing analogy suggesting that India was going to have to pad up to protect itself from what are going to be some quite fast-spun balls heading in its direction. But just turning our eye back to China and that conference that was held there, and yesterday we heard President Xi Jinping talking about global turmoil, tumultuous international relations. He also talked about bullying tactics being used by certain powers and clearly pointing the finger there at Washington. How much of a chord do you think that struck with Prime Minister Narendra Modi? Do you think he listened to that and thought, this is somebody speaking my kind of language?
Yes, yes, sure. I don't think that was meant for Prime Minister Modi. I think it was meant for President Trump. And I think that is part of the signaling that China, in particular, is doing as a emerging superpower, as a challenger to the United States. That listen, there is another worldview. I don't think it means that India and China, and in fact Russia, there are sort of teaming up against President Trump as a sort of club. But I think there is that kind of signaling, which at the moment suits everybody. It will not change the fundamentals of the India-China relationship, which we are seeing some amount of engagement. We are seeing some amount of easing of the thaw or improvement in the thaw that started actually last year. It will not remove the fundamental doubts, the fundamental questions of the India-China relationship. So I would desist from seeing this as a great breakthrough, as a major shift in India's policy, as a teaming up or falling into China's arms. I mean, all that again is neither true nor helpful.
Okay, so you don't seem to be of the view that India's at a crossroads. It's having to choose. Does it turn left towards that China-Russia-led axis? Does it keep going straight ahead and continue with the US collective West, or does it try to find a third way? You would discount all of that.
Well, I don't think these are zero-sum situations. I don't think countries like India, which are not which are actually civilizational powers more than anything else, and it's been our pronounced policy for the last 75 years that our policy is what is in India's interest. We will take decisions on that basis, whether you call it non-alignment, multi-alignment, strategic autonomy. Fundamentally, it means the same. So I don't think that we will be tilting from left to right and back to left if everything happens well. I think India will use this opportunity to go back to the drawing board, to understand that over-dependence on any country, on any one relationship, be it with the United States, is not in India's interest. And we will continue to see which relationship serves our interest at a particular time. There are certain limitations to each of these relationships, and there are advantages to each of these relationships. And I think Indian foreign policy is fairly experienced. They're old hands at this. And I think they will be able to manage this crisis. It should not be seen as a zero-sum game at all.
Just lastly, Ambassador Sarna, I mean, I'm imagining this issue of tariffs is the focus of considerable press interest. It's probably a subject of continued debate on the airwaves there in India. I'm wondering what sort of adjectives people are using to describe the relationship between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Trump, and what public opinion is on all of this. What are people saying?
I think that's a very interesting aspect of things. There was a lot of skepticism in India historically about a very close relationship with the United States, that you really can't trust the United States as a partner. And slowly we have built up that trust. Unfortunately, that trust, as I mentioned earlier, has been severely damaged. The language that has been used for India, and President Trump called India's economy, which is the fastest growing emerging economy, a dead economy. Now that sort of thing doesn't help. We've been called tariff kings, while there are analyses out there which tell you that several other countries are actually much higher tariffs, particularly trade-weighted tariffs, not just simple averages or simple numbers. So I think the feeling here is that we've been let down by the United States, that there is an unjustified attack on India, which is neither related to Russia or to oil, but seems to be targeting India's rise. It seems to be trying to constrain India's growth. And this has to be taken seriously by us. And I think there's a lot of public opinion, there's a lot of analysis how to handle the tariff issue if the tariffs do stay. I mean, they are being challenged in the American courts. But if the tariffs do stay, how do we handle them? How do we find new markets? How do we do internal economic reforms and bring back manufacturing to India? How do we relieve the pressure on the jobs which will be lost because of falling exports to the United States? So these are questions for the government. They're not easy questions, but I think at the moment it is a sort of, there is a sense of defiance. There is a sense of independence that has been invoked in India. It's an old sort of sense of feeling that when the world discriminates against you or a particular country discriminates against you for no obvious reason, then we have to turn to our own resources.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Navtej Sarna, former Indian ambassador to the United States, thank you very much indeed for your time, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.